everyone. This is Kavita Kiran, co-founder of Identity First. Welcome to our new episode of Leader Speak series. Today, we are excited to have data diva Ms. Debbie Reynolds on our show. Recognized as one of the top 8 global privacy experts among the 30 cybersecurity communicators, Debbie has over 20 years of experience and has worked across sectors including adtech, fintech, AI, etc. Debbie has presented at major venues including the Berkeley Forum, DocuSign, and has presented and shared her insights have been featured into top media outlets including the New York Times, Wired, and Bloomberg. As a CEO and Chief Data Officer, Debbie Reynolds Consulting, she helps organizations turn these data privacy challenges into a business opportunities. Welcome, Debbie, to the show. To have you. Hi, Debbie. Thank you so much. It is a privilege to have you on our show. And the first question that I have, Debbie, for you is, first of all, you have a very diverse background and you wear many hats. Could you just provide us a brief overview of yourself, of especially the professional profile and the various roles you currently play?
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show. And I really appreciate you reaching out, and I'm happy to be here to chat with you. So I am Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. I'm the founder, CEO, and Chief Data Privacy Officer of Debbie Reynolds Consulting. I work at the intersection of data privacy and emerging technology. So I work a lot with companies on digital transformation. I'm a technologist by trade, so I've always helped people with data and data systems and figuring out how to navigate that in a way that becomes a benefit and not a burden or a barrier to adoption, whether that's the adopting of contracts, adopting of customers, adopting of insights from different segments of people who maybe want to use a product or service. So that's primarily what I focus on. I work on the technology part of privacy. I help people understand and navigate the regulation part of privacy. And then I work a lot on standards as well. So I'm the chair of the IEEE connectivity for IoT or connected systems, and my group is based on human centricity. So we're based on trying to create standards for people who are developers or implementers of technology, how they need to think about privacy in those early stages, like privacy by design and different things. So we're an international group that is helping to go towards that standard. I speak a lot. I do a lot of keynote speaking for a lot of companies like Coca-Cola, PayPal, Uber, and I talk with them about technology and privacy. What do you need to think about? We have emerging threats and things that are happening with data that weren't happening before. And so companies need to really think differently about data, and they need to really think differently and more proactively about risk, whether that be privacy or cyber risk, when they're dealing with these new, more advanced systems.
The American Privacy Right Act was introduced recently. And how do you anticipate this legislation will impact the consumer data privacy in the US compared to the GDPR in the EU?
Yeah. Well, the challenge that we're having with this particular bill that's been put out, as was with the previous bill that was put out the year before, is that we have agencies that put out these bills. We have different industry groups that come against these bills. They really don't want it to pass. There's friction between the state laws and the federal laws, where the states don't want to see the federal law. The states want to see a federal law be a floor and not a ceiling, so not capping or changing their efforts on the state level. So because of that, it's been very difficult to get legislation passed on a federal level around privacy. So right now, that effort is stalled. So there really is no movement on it. And in an election year, it's hard to see, in an election year and in a situation where both parties are very divided and don't agree on much of anything, it's hard to see how much traction we'll get there. But I think, for all of us who want and wish for federal law, we would like to see something it's just a baseline that says, we as a country believe, these are our foundational principles. We're not going to stop other states from doing different things that they want, right? But just saying, here, for example, for me, I think if we just harmonize the language and the definitions around privacy, I think that will help a lot across the US, and it will help people internationally understand what's happening in the US and understand how to do business in the US. And then perhaps the states, if they want to do something in addition, that they have that right. So right now we're fighting this battle because a lot of lobbyist groups don't want to see consumers have a right to sue companies if they mishandle their data, and they want to, unfortunately, they want the federal law to basically stop states or curtail states from creating their own laws around privacy. So it's a big issue.
I can totally understand. I think with the current political condition and the presidential elections in the coming months, I'm sure it will take some more time for you all to have a formed up law. Can you elaborate on the importance of minimizing data collection, and how does this practice contribute to both data protection and a better customer experience?
Absolutely. So minimizing data is vitally important. To me, is the best first step that companies can take to help themselves to reduce risk for themselves and for their customers. So data minimization really is around figuring out what data you have. Don't collect more than what you need for a particular purpose, making sure that you're using it for the purpose that it was intended for, and you're not using it for a purpose that people aren't aware of, so get really upset. And then what that will do during the course of that data use, first of all, it will reduce, let's say if your company is breached, it reduces the amount of data that's possibly breached or amount of people that are impacted. And then also from a consumer perspective, it also reduces their risk, right? Because what we're seeing, unfortunately, is companies keeping a lot of data, maybe data that doesn't have a high business value, but it has a high cyber risk. And so a lot of breaches that you see when you read about it, they're like, oh, this is like legacy data that we weren't using anymore, but you kept it anyway. And they had no reason why they keep it, right? But it's creating more risk for consumers and for companies. So I think data minimization has to be thought from very foundational level, from the beginning of how you collect data all the way to the end. So data should have a expiration. It should have a end of life. And unfortunately, companies have not traditionally had to delete data, right? So all they did was focus their energy on collecting data, not getting rid of it. So minimizing what you collect, making sure that your collection of data and use of it is aligned with the purpose for which you originally collected it, making sure that you're not oversharing data with third parties. And then once your data purpose is extinguished, you need to either, delete the data, give the data back to the person, anonymize it in some way where it's no longer personally identifiable and the company can use it without having, a huge problem. But, all these strategies are things the companies had not traditionally had to do. So I think trying to be proactive about your data and creating more of a data strategy as opposed to a tactic where you're reacting to laws or legislation every time it comes out. Companies need a strategy around data.
That's a great point. Now, as you already mentioned in your answer with the data sharing, my next question is, what steps should organizations take to ensure that data sharing agreements with third parties are secure and compliant with privacy regulation?
I think it's hard, right? So writing a contract is different than knowing what people do with data, but I think it's really incumbent on companies, especially the way that the data protection regulations are written, right? It isn't a situation where, like, say for instance, I'm a first party company and I give my data to a third party. In the past, third parties thought, well, It's not my responsibility to do anything different with the data because the first party is their data, it's their responsibility. So what these regulations are saying is, hey, regardless of whether you're first party, third party, or whatever, you all have a obligation to protect data and you have an obligation to decide who's going to do what. So I think with these data sharing agreements, it's always important for each party to understand what their role is and what they need to be doing to be able to protect data. I think it's important that companies need to figure out ways to minimize what they share, right? So instead of, I know maybe it's easier to share everything, right? But that may not be the best for the company, for either company, and it may not be the best for the consumer. Because if you're sharing everything, then if something happens with that data, you're on the hook or you're going to be, punished, whether that be from a regulator, whether that be from a consumer who's not happy about how you're handling your data and they may go to a different, service. So I think all of those things, there needs to be a lot more focus there. It can't just be signing a contract and be like, oh yeah, whatever, we're going to do whatever. It has to be more thought to it and it has to be more structure to it. And so I think, again, moving away from data tactics to data strategy is where companies need to be.
And how can organizations enforce consumer consent when collecting data to ensure that preferences are upheld throughout the data lifecycle?
Well, I think technology plays a big part in that, especially for companies that have a lot of consumers, right? Companies that have a lot of consumers, they have to use technology to be able to get that consent. I think, what we're seeing, unfortunately, is some companies, they're using data or reusing data, or repurposing data in ways where they're not asking for consent, right? So maybe they collect the data for one reason, but they're using it for another. And that's like a big no-no. You're really not supposed to do that, right? And so unfortunately, the way companies have used data in the past is like the data comes in and then they lose control over it and they don't know who's doing what with the data and they're not accustomed to giving a level of transparency that's now being required by a lot of regulation around how data is how it's collected, how it's used, all the way through the data life cycle. And so, we're seeing that. I don't know if you've seen recently, people are upset that on LinkedIn that someone found in the settings that the setting was turned on. There was a new setting on LinkedIn that said that they can use your data for like AI training. And so a few people found that setting and they were really upset because they were like, well, I didn't agree to that, right? But the setting is turned on by default and it shouldn't be that way, right? Especially in countries like, India, South America, Europe, all those are, have opt-in things in terms of you have to opt in and agree. Even Middle East, it's very much opt-in, right? And so, unfortunately, the U.S. we're more of like opt-out country where you can be opted into a lot of stuff, and then the burden is on the consumer to opt out, and so it shouldn't be that way. So even people in the U.S. who know and understand that's the way the legal landscape, they aren't happy about it. So I think companies need to think beyond regulation, right? Because you don't want to upset your customer or have someone not be happy with your service if they feel that you're taking undue advantage of them and you're not giving them transparency about what you're doing with their data.
Now, Debbie, in the light of this increasing consumer skepticism about data privacy, what strategies can organization adopt to rebuild trust and demonstrate the commitment to data protection?
That's a great question. I think transparency is key. I think that companies have not traditionally been transparent about the way that they handle people's data. So they always felt like, okay, as long as I'm providing someone a product or a service, then I don't have to tell them like what I'm doing with their data, right? And so that's just not the case. I think that's not the future, right? So I think people want to know, we find that people are more likely to give companies data who they trust, right? And they're likely to give them good data. So there's a lot of bad data out there. Some people don't trust some companies, so they give them fake data or fake information just to use their service because they don't trust them. So I think part of that equation of companies really being able to succeed in the future has to be based on transparency.
So, what are the key advantages of server side tag management over the client side tagging in terms of data privacy and cybersecurity?
Well, I don't want to get too far in the weeds on that particular thing, but I think all that still goes back to transparency, right? So making sure that everyone knows what the data is collected for, what's the purpose. Make sure, especially if people want to opt out of things, you want to make sure that they can opt out. It's not just privacy theater where they're clicking buttons and nothing happens, right? So I think, especially as companies have more problems with opting people out of things and stopping data uses, it's very easy to click a box and say, I want this or I don't want this. The problem is that a lot of companies, their systems and their processes aren't made to either delete data or opt people out in real ways, in an easy way, right? So I think, in my view, I tell companies if you can't protect the data, then you should not collect it. So if you can't protect it, don't collect it, right? So if it's too hard for you to be able to uphold your obligation to create that level of transparency for people and to give them ways to change, right? To opt out. Because people will opt out. They will say, well, maybe I liked this service before, but I don't really care for how you're doing X. And then I want to opt out of this, or I don't want to receive your information, or I don't want to do X or Y. So that has been traditionally been the toughest thing the company's ever had to do with data, because software is made to remember data, not to forget it, right? So it's a challenge for companies to try to find ways to fulfill their obligations around that. So I would say, I feel like some companies, they get really caught up in the technology and they get very excited about the collection, and they're not as excited as they should be on how to help people opt out and help people really control their choices in in the best way.
What role do you believe, Debbie, marketers will play in shaping privacy forward futures as data privacy regulations evolve?
I think marketing is key. I remember when the GDPR went in force, some websites went down. They were like, well, we don't know what we're supposed to do with GDPR, so we're just not gonna shut our website down, right? Because we saw that with a lot of big international companies. They were like, we don't know what to do, right? And so I feel like marketers are the front line to a lot of what people interact with when they think about privacy, right? Because they're like, I'm going on this website, I'm reading this article, I'm using this service, I'm using this product. And when I go online, the first thing that they're met with is choices, right? Oh, what are the cookies? What are this? What are that? And that can be very tiring too, from people. So it's like fatigue of like making all these choices. But when someone makes a choice, they want to, for example, opt out, or they don't want cookies or whatever, they're trusting the company that's actually happening in the background, whether they can see it or not. So I think that companies need to find ways to make sure that they're being transparent about that and that they're actually meeting those obligations. So, I've seen a lot of companies where, yeah, you say opt out, but then they didn't opt you out, or you say, oh, I don't want to receive advertising, but you receive advertising anyway. So, because so much of this, what happens in marketing is automated. Automation can go too far, especially if you're not thinking about, if someone opts into something. And I actually had this situation happen to me where I had a marketer contact me about something, and I had first signed in. I was getting too many emails or too many texts and stuff, and I said, oh, I don't really want this, so opt out. But when I did that, the things never stopped. So I'm like, this is a problem, right? This is a problem that consumers have where they're like, okay, you asked me to opt in. I did opt in. You abused my trust.
Right.
And then when I say I want to opt out, then you didn't actually do it, right? And so I think that's the problem that we have right now. So we need to build more trust in marketing and be able to really fulfill people's requests around that, or they're gonna not want to do business with you or not want to give you their data.
Final question for for a part one series. You have any three recommendations for the enterprises and for consumers, on especially the data protection side? If you have to give three top recommendations or three top advices, what would that be?
I don't know, maybe I'm a broken record, but for the marketers, it has to be about transparency for sure.
Right.
Making sure, also making sure that they have a good data strategy from cradle to grave, from the beginning of collecting data to all the way to the end of purpose or end of life of data. And then for customers, I think that they need to be more careful about what they share their data for and see if it's really of value to them. So what I'm seeing is companies, people asking more questions of companies. They're like, hey, what do you use my data for, right? Because just the unprecedented number of breaches and the things that people have to go through if their data is breached, like they are very suspicious, as they should be, right? Like, who are you? Why should I share this data with you? So I think that those things will continue to happen, but companies that are trustworthy and can answer those questions and can respect people's rights, I think they'll go better in the future.
Perfect. So as a data privacy expert, I think awareness is, if I have to sum up, awareness is a big point that we need to drive out, right, among the consumers as well as among the enterprises. Because as a consumer, they're not even aware where exactly the data is, why why the data is going, and what is going to happen with the data as such. So that is a crucial question. I think across the world, that's what you feel, right? As you mentioned, the careful, and that people should be more careful where the data is being used. That kind of question they should be aware of.
Yeah, I think it just depends. It depends on the person. It depends on the country. It depends on, maybe certain generations feel that way. I feel like, just from what I've seen, I think the older people that I meet, they tend to be more suspicious
Right.
of things, digital things. And maybe that's, to me, it's somewhat good, right? They ask really good questions. You're like, well, why are we doing this? What's this purpose, right? Where younger people maybe don't think about it as much, but I think what's happening, the thing that I'm seeing is changing, is because of a lot of data breaches, especially, we in the US, we had this huge data breach of, I think it was like Gamer. It was like a game, like a video game or something. And I know a woman, her son, he's a teenager, and they sent him a notice about, oh, your data was breached, and now you have to do X, Y, and Z. And mostly you think about that as an adult, right? Like, oh, I got this breach notification. But like, what if your teenager got a breach notification, right? And they were like, well, what does that mean? What am I supposed to do, right? And so I think a lot of younger people, as they're being exposed to some of these threats that are happening online, they're becoming a little bit more suspicious too. So I think it depends. I've had people say, actually had Dr. Erin Kavukian on my podcast, she's the inventor of privacy by design, that theory. And, one thing she said is privacy is not a religion. So if you want to give your privacy away, then you can, right? But for me, I feel like it's very important that people need to understand what are the upside and what are the downsides, and then they can make an educated decision. And right now, it's not clear to people like what they're giving away when they give away their data. So it's important.
It's a long way to go, actually, right? Thank you so much, Debbie. It was great having you, and thank you so much for your insights. And I'm sure people will really, really, benefit from this. Thank you so much for the part one series, and would love to host you in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you.